Look at this photograph. Not a painting, not an illustration, a real photograph from the 1800s. It shows a tree stump so large that a dance hall was built on top of it. People are standing on it, waltzing, laughing, drinking. The stump is wider than most houses, and the cut at the top is perfectly flat. Not jagged from axes, not splintered from handsaws, flat, clean, machined. Now look at this. A canyon wall somewhere in the American southwest. Not a famous one, not the one on the postcards. A section that most tourists walk past without stopping. If you zoom in on the face of that wall, you see lines, parallel lines, evenly spaced, running horizontally across hundreds of feet of solid rock. Straight lines that never deviate. The kind of lines you cannot make with a chisel and a hammer. Not in that volume, not at that scale. Not that consistent. Nobody in mainstream geology has a satisfying explanation for those lines. They call them erosion patterns and move on. But erosion does not carve parallel grooves into vertical rock faces with centimetre precision. Water does not work in straight lines. Wind does not either. So here is the question that's been sitting in the back of certain researchers' minds for decades. What if the same technology that cut those trees so massive their stumps became buildings, also carved those canyons? What if what we call geological formations are actually something else entirely? What if the Grand Canyon, the slot canyons of Utah, the sandstone corridors of Petra, and dozens of other formations around the world are not the product of millions of years of water erosion, but the remnants of an industrial operation conducted by a civilization we have been taught did not exist? This is the territory we are entering today. Not mythology, not fantasy. Evidence, physical, measurable, photographable evidence that something does not add up. Welcome. Let us start with the trees. In the 1800s, logging companies in Northern California, Oregon, and parts of Nevada documented trees of almost impossible scale. The stumps left behind after these trees were taken down still exist. Some of them are over 30 feet in diameter. The Centennial Stump in Kings Canyon is one. The Mark Twain tree stump, now in the American Museum of Natural History in New York, is another. The museum had to cut it into sections to get it through the door. These were real trees. Nobody disputes that. The stumps are sitting there in the ground. But the question that alternative researchers started asking around 2017 and 2018 was deceptively simple. How were they cut? Look at any photograph of these stumps closely. The cut surface is not rough. It is not the kind of surface you get from a two-man crosscut saw, which was the primary logging tool of that era. Crosscut saws leave a specific pattern. They leave a slightly uneven surface with a particular grain to the cut. The surfaces on these stumps do not match that pattern. Several of them show a finish that is consistent with a large diameter rotary cutting blade, a circular saw, but not a hand-operated one. Something powered. The official story says those trees were felled using axes and crosscut saws by teams of loggers working for days or weeks. And for smaller trees, that is entirely believable. For trees 30 feet across, the math does not work. A standard crosscut saw of that era was, at most, 12 feet long. You cannot use a 12-foot saw to fell a tree with a 30-foot diameter trunk. The geometry is impossible. The saw cannot reach the center. This is basic woodworking logic, and mainstream historians have never provided a satisfying answer. They suggest teams worked in coordinated stages using springboards, but no one has ever demonstrated that method at that scale. There is no documentation of the actual felling process for the largest specimens. Just the stumps sitting there, cut clean, and an official story that stops asking questions. Now here is where it connects to the canyons. In 2019, a researcher named Philip Druzhinin began systematically documenting what he called tool marks in canyon walls across the American West. His findings reached researchers in Europe who identified similar features in the canyon systems of Spain, Turkey, and the Caucasus region. The marks follow a consistent pattern. They appear on vertical or near vertical or rock faces. They are parallel, horizontal, and evenly spaced. They often appear in sections as if whatever made them was moving laterally along the face of the rock, and crucially, they appear in the hardest sections of the rock, not the softest. If these were erosion marks, they would follow the path of least resistance. They would be more pronounced in softer strata and absent or minimal in harder strata. The opposite is true. The marks are most consistent in the harder layers. This is a problem for the erosion explanation. Water erosion works through abrasion, where sediment carried by fast-moving water gradually wears down rock. But abrasion does not leave parallel horizontal marks on vertical walls. It leaves smooth, curved, irregular surfaces, consistent with what you see on the canyon floor, not consistent with what you see on the vertical faces hundreds of feet above the waterline. Those upper faces are the problem. They should not have tool marks, and yet they do. Geologists who have been asked about this generally offer one of two responses. The first is that the marks are natural jointing, a process where rock fractures along parallel planes due to pressure changes during geological uplift. The second is differential erosion, where layers of differing hardness erode at different rates and creating stepped or lined appearances. Both of these explanations apply to certain formations, but neither fully accounts for what is visible in hard granite and quartzite sections, where the marks cut across natural bedding planes rather than following them. Natural jointing follows the internal structure of the rock. These marks do not. They are imposed from outside. That is a critical distinction. Let us talk about Petra. Petra, in modern Jordan, is one of the most studied ancient sites on Earth. The conventional explanation is that the Nabatean people, a nomadic Arab tribe, carved this entire city into the sandstone cliffs beginning around the 4th century B.C. They used hand tools, chisels, hammers, possibly bronze implements, and they created, according to this story, thousands of rooms, temples, tombs, and corridors with smooth walls, level floors, and precisely cut doorways, all without power tools, without machinery, and without leaving behind any of the massive quantities of cut stone debris that such an operation would generate. Archaeological surveys of Petra have not found rubble deposits consistent with manual quarrying at the scale the site represents. The material went somewhere. Either it was removed or it was not produced, which means the cutting method was not manual. There are sections of Petra where the wall surfaces show the same horizontal parallel marks visible in the American canyon systems. Not in the decorative areas, in the working sections. The unfinished rooms at the back of complexes that were apparently abandoned mid-process. Abandoned mid-process is another detail that keeps appearing. At Petra, at several canyon sites in the American Southwest, and at quarry sites in Egypt and Lebanon, you find sections that look like the work simply stopped, not finished and sealed, not deliberately left incomplete for ritual reasons, just stopped, as if the equipment was removed and never came back. The Baalbek quarry in Lebanon is one of the most striking examples. There, a stone block known as the Hajar al-Hibla, the stone of the pregnant woman, sits in an ancient quarry partially cut from the bedrock. It weighs approximately 1,650 tons. By comparison, the largest stone ever moved by modern heavy equipment for construction purposes weighs around 500 tons, and moving it required specialized hydraulic transporters working for months. The Hajar al-Hibla was never moved. It sits exactly where it was being cut, with 3 of its 4 sides already separated from the surrounding rock, with a cutting precision that matches stones already installed in the nearby temple platform. Whoever was doing this work had the capability to cut a 1,650-ton block from bedrock with clean edges, and then, apparently, stopped, left, did not return. This pattern, large-scale cutting operations abandoned mid-work, shows up at multiple sites across what researchers in the Tartaria space identify as a connected civilization zone. The Americas, Western Europe, the Middle East, Central Asia. The same methods, the same marks, the same sudden cessation. Now let us come back to the trees. There is a theory, developed across multiple researchers over the last several years, that what we call mountains and canyons in certain regions are not geological formations in the conventional sense. They are the remnants of biological structures, specifically the stumps and root systems of trees, at a scale we no longer have a reference point for because nothing alive today approaches that scale. This is where many people stop listening. It sounds too extreme. But consider what we already know. The trees that were logged in the 1800s were genuinely enormous. The sequoias and redwoods alive today are the survivors, reduced versions of species that were far more widespread and far larger before industrial logging. What we call giant sequoias now, the ones that tourists take photographs next to, may be juveniles compared to what existed several hundred years ago. The stumps in the logging photographs are cut at the base, which is typically the narrowest part of the trunk. The tree above that cut would have been taller and broader than anything we currently consider possible for a living organism. Some researchers have attempted to scale up from the stump dimensions using the proportional geometry of modern sequoias and arrived at height estimates in the range of 1 to 2 kilometers for the larger specimens, 1 to 2 kilometers tall. That is taller than any mountain in the British Isles, taller than many ranges in Central Europe. And here is the connection to canyons. A tree of that scale would have a root system to match. When such a tree dies or is removed, the root system decomposes. In geology, there is a well-documented process called piping, where subsurface voids left by decayed organic material collapse and create surface formations. At the scale of a 1 kilometer tree, the root system voids would be enormous. Their collapse would produce formations that look exactly like slot canyons, branching canyon systems, and the distinctive narrow corridors found in places like Antelope Canyon in Arizona. Antelope Canyon does not look like it was carved by water. Stand inside it and look at the walls. They curve, they spiral, they look organic, they look like the inside of a mold, a space that something large once occupied and then left. The curves are not random. They have a consistency that matches the branching geometry of root structures. The tool marks on canyon walls in this framework are not marks from a quarrying operation. They are marks from whatever process was used to remove the material. The same rotary cutting technology that took down the giant trees was also used to process the organic material in the root systems to cut and remove it in sections. The marks on the walls are from that process. The walls themselves are the interior surfaces of spaces that were once filled. This is speculative. It needs to be said clearly. There is no physical specimen of a root from a kilometer-scale tree. There is no direct documentation of the cutting operation. What exists is a convergence of anomalies that individually have conventional explanations, but together do not fit neatly into any single accepted framework. The tool marks exist, that is verifiable. The anomalous stump cuts exist, that is verifiable. The missing debris at Petra and Bolbec exists as an absence, which is harder to verify but documentable through archaeological records. The sudden abandonment of large-scale cutting operations across multiple continents is a pattern visible in the physical record. What caused this abandonment? What stopped whoever was operating at this scale? The Tartaria framework suggests a reset event within the last few hundred to perhaps a few thousand years, when a civilization of significant technological capability was destroyed or dismantled, its infrastructure absorbed and explained away by what came after. The evidence extends beyond canyon walls to anomalies in historical records, city construction timelines that do not match their labor requirements, and architectural styles appearing fully formed without any documented developmental period. None of this is proof. Proof would require access to the original documentation, the original machines, or a physical specimen that directly connects the canyon formation process to a human or human-like operation. None of those exist in public view. What exists is the accumulating weight of the anomalies themselves. Stand at the rim of the Grand Canyon, look at the vertical walls, find a section with those parallel horizontal marks, ask the next park ranger you see to explain them precisely. Watch what happens. You will get the erosion answer delivered with complete confidence. Ask a follow-up question about why the marks appear in the hardest rock layers rather than the softest. See how far the confidence holds. The tool marks are still there. They have been there for whatever period of time separates us from the civilization that made them. They will still be there when this video ends, when the debate in the comments runs its course, when everyone goes to sleep and wakes up tomorrow. The walls do not care whether we believe them or not. They just hold the record, waiting for someone to read it seriously. If you have seen these marks yourself in any canyon in any country, document them. Measure the spacing, photograph the hardness gradient of the surrounding rock. That kind of systematic documentation, accumulated across enough locations, becomes data. And data is the only thing that eventually forces a conversation that the official story cannot avoid. The question is not whether the marks exist. They do. The question is what made them, and why the answer to that has never been given the serious scientific investigation it deserves. We are still waiting. If this made you look at something familiar in a new way, subscribe. There is more of this coming. formations, ruins, photographic records, and documentation that the official story has never adequately addressed. You deserve to see all of it. See you in the next one.